Hi there, Heroes Dive students. Dr. Adam here, and this is your Module 7 and 8 review. This is the last review video that you will have for this course, and this will cover the last two, well, 7 and 8, not the last module, which is Module 9. Well, 7 and 8 are the last modules that you'll be tested on. So Module 9 is on breaking into the commercial industry, and it does not have any required material on it for the final exam. You will also note that in Module 8, you have the opportunity to start taking the final exam. The final exam is a 100-question exam. It is self-paced. You do have to complete it all in one session, but you can take it as many times as you like, and you can take as long as you like on it. It is also an open book exam. You have until December 31st at 11:59 p.m. to complete this exam, and there will be no extensions. So you have the next 2.5 months to do this. So I would encourage you to take the exam as quickly as possible. Once you complete the exam, about 4 weeks after you complete the exam, you will get a certificate of completion emailed to your email address that you provided us. Make sure that when you complete the exam, that all the information that you enter is correct, meaning your name, how you want your name spelled. There is a line that asks you how exactly you want your name on your certificate. Make sure you verify that that is all correct before you submit that exam. That will save us a lot of time on the back end, having to reissue certificates that had incorrect information on them. So please make sure that you're entering that information correctly. So what I'm going to be covering today is Module 7 and 8 questions that are relevant to the exam. And then I will also be covering the questions that were given for the office hours last month, which I had to cancel due to some personal reasons. So we'll cover those questions today as well. So this will be a little bit longer of a review. But I'll start with the exam questions that you're interested in likely, so that if you don't want to go through the other questions that were submitted, you don't have to. So let's go through those exam questions now. So what are the questions you need to know for Module 7 and 8? Well, the first one is you need to be aware of what are the main drivers of overwintering losses for honeybees in the modern era. You also need to know how often you should be checking and managing for varroa mites. You need to know what honey provides bees that allow them to thermoregulate. So what is it that actually allows them to create heat as a food source from honey? So what is honey providing for those bees to create heat? We want to know the 3 ways that bees heat during the winter, so how they're thermoregulating. We want to know the 2 parts of an overwintering cluster. So what are those 2 parts and what are they called? We need to know what happens when bees respire after consuming honey. You also want to know, what does it mean to consolidate resources in a colony as you prepare for winter? So I talk about this in several of the overwintering and preparing for overwintering lectures, is what it means to consolidate resources. You need to know, what is the most common miticide that we use in low and no brood conditions at the end of the season? And this is a specific compound that you should be aware of. We want to know, what are the moisture wicking devices that we recommend in the lectures as far as going through winter. You want to know what all the pieces of equipment are that I recommend for adding to your colony for overwintering success. You want to know how much water is produced through respiration by a colony that consumes about 100 pounds of honey. So how much water would that produce? You want to know what you do with dead outs when you find them. Do you just leave them? Do you take care of them? What do you do with the dead out when you find it during or after winter? And the last question that you're going to want to know is, what are wax moths targeting in stored frames? So what is it they're actually going after in a stored frame? Those are all the questions that you're going to need to know. So I would recommend that if you are looking to take the final exam and complete that exam, that you go through these review videos, because I talk about all the questions that are going to be given to you in the exam in these review videos. If you review what I have given you in these review sessions here, you will have no problem passing the exam. So just focus on what I've talked about in these review videos. Make sure that you've watched all the required lectures, you've looked at the handouts that are required, you've gone through the instructional videos that are required, and you should have no problem passing this exam. Now, when you take the exam, it is automatically graded. You will get a grade right after you submit the exam. It'll pop up on the same screen. Take a look at that. Now, it'll also have all of your answers that you made on all of those questions listed. Now, one thing it will not do, it will not give you the correct answers. It will tell you how many you missed on that 100-question exam, but it's not going to tell you which ones you missed. That is your responsibility to go back through those questions and identify the questions that you struggled on. The reason we don't give you the correct examination question is because there's thousands of you that are taking this exam together, and we can't just give the answers out and when somebody enters their first try at an exam, because then that could spread to everybody. So you will not get the correct answers given to you when you complete the exam, but it will tell you how many you missed. You will have the full printout of the exam available to you when you submit that question. You can also print a PDF of that. There's a link on that page once you submit. Look through that very carefully. Go through that. If you pass the exam, that will come to me, and I will issue a certificate in about 4 weeks to you that will be emailed to you directly. And that is your certificate that proves that you've completed the Heroes to Hives course. Now, once you complete the course, that's when we can transfer your credits over to the Great Plains Master Beekeeping course. There will be a video in Module 9 that will discuss that in detail of what that looks like. But that transfer does not happen until next year. It's not an automatic thing. We wait till all of the exams are done for the year, meaning that it will be, you have until December 31st at the end of the day to complete these exams. So it will not be until the beginning of next year that we will start transferring your credits over. So please be patient with that. Just remember, we've got over 4,100 students that have the potential to take this exam. We want to make sure everybody gets through those so that we can get everybody transferred at one time into GPMB. So that's what you can expect there. Other than that, like I said, you'll have a video in Module 9 that'll talk more about the GPMB program and transferring credits and all of that good stuff. That'll be covered in Module 9. All right, so the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to go over the questions that were submitted last month for office hours. Again, I had to cancel those for some personal reasons, so we're going to go through those questions now. All right, so let's just start going down the list. So the first question is, I have a screened bottom board going into winter. I assume I need to make that a solid bottom board. Is it best to slide the slab of wood in above the screen and risk the bees gluing it to the slides, or is it best to slide below? The latter seems easier, but will allow airflow into the bottom of the hive. Okay, so here's the big thing about screen bottom boards and solid bottom boards. The bees don't care. You can run screen bottom boards, solid bottom boards. I have run for many years. I have a lot of screen bottom boards that don't even have bottoms in them anymore, meaning the insert has completely been lost. Those bees will overwinter just fine, even with an open bottom board. So don't worry about the bottom board. The bottom board is not going to make a difference in your survival rate whatsoever when it comes to honeybees overwintering. So it really doesn't matter. You could throw a piece of wood in there. You don't have to. I would just, if you've got an insert that you can slide in, just slide the insert in. But if you lose that, it's not going to cause the bees to die simply because you don't have a solid bottom board. Screen bottom boards are just fine. Next question is, I'm a second-year beekeeper in Pennsylvania, but my hives unfortunately died out last year as winter rolled around. This spring, I bought a total of 4 colonies and all have drawn comb with laying queens. My question is there a reason why my bees would not be storing honey? As part of this endeavor, my father and I planted an acre of buckwheat to help them with fall flow. We see a large amount of activity on the buckwheat, but in the last month, the bees have not stored any of the nectar, and we're starting to get concerned that bees will not have the ability to survive the winter. We have not harvested any honey from these colonies, and we occasionally fed them to try and help with their stores, but still no luck. We also see no signs of robbing between colonies. Any advice would be appreciated. Okay, so this is an odd question. Mainly because if you're not getting honey storage at all, there's something else going on. If these are strong, healthy colonies, they should be just fine. But if they're smaller, struggling colonies, meaning they might have high mite loads, disease presence, or something like that, foraging activity is going to be highly limited because there's going to be a lot of stress on the colony. However, there's a lot of different things this could be. One, it could be that you're just in an area that's saturated with honeybees and there's way too much competition in the area. That could be the case. This happens oftentimes in urban environments where you have a lot of beekeepers in a small area and they're all competing for resources. That could be a case. It could also be that, just because you planted buckwheat doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to access it. So, I mean, weather has to come into play here as well. So, if you don't have a lot of good foraging days during a crop that's open, that's open for nectar and pollination, say it's windy or rainy or bad flight days, they won't access those resources. We see that a lot with apple blossom here in the Upper Peninsula, where the weather just doesn't line up for the bees to allow them to access apple blossoms. Although it would be pretty odd to not have good flying days in the fall with a buckwheat crop. The biggest thing I can tell you here is that what you are likely looking at is a robbing situation. Even though you feel like you may not be, the only thing that's limiting bees from bringing in honey in that healthy colony is the fact that other bees may be taking it. Now, one thing I would have recommended earlier on in the season is that this is something where fall feeding is going to have to be the only way you're going to be able to get weight to put on, and that's 2-to-1 sugar syrup, and that's something that you should be feeding nonstop. If you see something like this, going into August and in September, that's a pretty tough situation, though. Yeah, if they're not putting on weight, something is going on here. And it's hard to say without actually seeing a colony. So, my best advice to you would be internal feeders and big feeders. I mean, put a gallon bucket or a 2-gallon bucket feeder on them, or a 2-gallon frame feeder on them, something like that, to get them to put on some weight. But if you're going into colonies in the winter with really light colonies, the only way that you're going to be able to get them through, and you can, is just by feeding. And what I mean by that is sugar feeding. So making sure that there is always sugar on top of that colony so that it does have a food source, even if there's not honey or nectar stored in those frames. All right, next question is, we have a veteran living in Denver and was hoping to connect with other veterans that are looking to get started in Colorado and want to partner. Okay, so this individual is looking for essentially ways to connect with other individuals in the course. We do not have that. All of your information is kept private when you register for Heroes to Hives. That's part of our data sharing agreement that we share with you upon registration, is that we will not share your information with anybody. We do have a program that we are starting in the 2025 cohort called the Bee Buddy program, where alumni of the program are going to be posting their information if they are interested in supporting other veterans that are part of the program currently. So that's not going to be launching until 2025. So unfortunately, we don't have a method for that right now. Keep in mind, folks, this is not a mentorship program. This is not a program where we connect you with other veterans. This is an education program. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that is the focus of the Heroes to Hives program, is to provide you with a very high quality science-based education. The community aspect of this, although it does happen in the states where we have on-ground programming, because we're able to meet once a month with those on-ground places, those of you that are in states where we do not have on-ground programming, this is why we highly recommend you be part of a local bee club. Your local bee clubs are where the beekeeping community is. It's where you're going to find support. It's where you're going to find other veterans that are working in beekeeping. So just keep that in mind. But unfortunately, because of how big the program is, and I mean, all the education that we are providing you, we just don't have the capacity to also do mentorship connections as well. But like I said, in 2025, we'll have the Bee Buddy program that we're launching, which will be basically a map of Heroes to Hives alumni who are interested in supporting other veterans that are getting into beekeeping. All right, next question. My issue, okay, so here we have a question. My issue is I removed my 2-frame feeder and put 2 frames in. I don't have drawn comb in the 2 new frames. I put 2 1-gallon feeders on top of the hive and pollen patties. Any suggestions on how to get them to quickly draw out these frames? Okay, so this message was sent on September 26th. There's not going to be fall drawing of frames. Bees draw frames when they are in the presence of a large amount of nectar, meaning that bees are only going to be drawing during certain parts of the time when there are heavy nectar flows. And the reason is because wax drawing is very resource intensive on honeybees. They have to have a lot of resources coming in order for those wax glands to actually be stimulated to produce wax. Now, they will slowly produce wax over the entire season, but in the fall, you are not going to get these 2 frames drawn. Plain and simple. It's just not going to happen. You can feed them as much as you want. They're going to be storing that food. They're not going to be stimulated for wax drawing. So what I would recommend in this situation, if you had a frame feeder, which for those of you that are unfamiliar, those are feeders that basically sit in the position of two frames that you put at the end of a hive body. What I would recommend is taking those two frames that are undrawn and putting them on the position 1 and position 10 of your colony so that everything that has resources is in the middle. You don't want to just have those two hanging out on the side, but those frames are not going to get drawn. The other thing I would recommend is taking off the pollen patties. Pollen patties in the fall are going to keep brood stimulated for rearing, and you do not want that. During the fall, we are looking for brood to condense. We're looking for brood to slowly condense until it's not there anymore. And by you providing pollen patties, that is basically creating a situation where those bees still think there's a large amount of pollen coming into the colony, which may actually stimulate more brood rearing and keep brood on longer. Now, if you're in northern climates like where I'm at, if I have brood on past November, that is almost a death sentence for those colonies because they will not release from brood. If there's brood still in the colony in, say, December here, and we're in 20-degree weather, the brood will, or the bees will stay on the brood and thermoregulate that brood and will not release off of the brood to get to the honey resources that they need for thermoregulation. This is the same situation that happens in the spring when we have starvation in place, where bees put brood on really early in the year when it's still cold, and they will not release from the brood to get to the honey resources they need to thermoregulate, and that causes starvation in place. So make sure, get those pollen patties off, move your frames to position 1 and 10 that are empty, keep the drawn frames in the middle, all resources on top, and make sure that top box above that colony is completely floor to ceiling, no gaps, meaning all those frames are full of honey, and you should be okay. But you're not going to get wax drawing this time of the year. That's just not going to happen. All right. Next question. Can you help explain what is best for bottom boards? What factors are in play, like moisture and ventilation, solid versus screen? A bit confused on what factors might drive any decision or preference. We're in the thumb of the Lower Peninsula. Thanks for all the information. So like I said in the earlier question, bees do not care. I live in the UP. I have many colonies that have screen bottom boards that don't even have inserts in them, and they overwinter just fine. The style of your bottom board is not going to make a difference on winter bee survival at all. The things that are key for winter survival of honeybees: Varroa mite is under control. That is the number one thing that's going to kill your bees in the winter. If those are not under control, your colonies are going to die out usually before the first of the year, 1st of February, something like that. Moisture is the other main killer of honeybees. Moisture is something that we mitigate by using moisture boards and things like that, and augmenting the insulation or augmenting the temperature by putting insulation on the top of the colony. And then the last piece of that, moisture, Varroa mites, and starvation. Starvation is just making sure you have bees that are fed and have plenty of food. But the bottom board is not going to come into play at all. Whether it's open, screened, solid, it does not matter. I've overwintered with great success in all ways, and I have many colonies that don't even have inserts on them that have solid or screen bottom boards. So that is not going to make a difference whatsoever. Okay. Next question. During the previous office hours in module 7, you spoke about Africanized bees. Could you expound on them some? I have a hive that's extremely aggressive. Just opening the lid to provide sugar water causes them to boil out and attack me. The hive was requeened in early August, and it seems to be calming some as new genetics are still taking over. Still quite easily irritated, but I think it's related to fall and resource guarding. Absolutely. Your bees will be entirely different bees in the fall. They will go from being very nice and pleasant bees to oftentimes being very defensive. So this is something that just happens in fall most of the time. Let's see here. What else did we have on them? But during the really bad time, I had several people from my local bee club express concern that my bees may be Africanized. Is this really a thing? Do they become Africanized? At no time during this life has this queen has this colony had a queen of unknown origin. Yes, Africanized bees are a real thing. They are in the Southwest and the South, portions of the South. So pretty much kind of from like West Louisiana all the way through the Southwest. Texas, if you live in Texas, Africanized bees are everywhere. New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, yes, Africanized bees are a real thing. Everywhere else, they are not going to be a real thing. You may just have aggressive bees, and that does happen. Sometimes you get a hot queen. But let me tell you, If it's an Africanized hive, you are really going to know. And it's not just going to be some angry bees coming after you. It's going to be hundreds of bees covering you. When I've worked Africanized hives in Costa Rica, in Southern California, when they are after you, you will literally have your face of your veil nearly covered in bees, fanning alarm pheromone right at you. It is not just angry bees. It is a full-on full-scale attack, and these bees will follow you sometimes for miles when you leave a colony. So when you deal with an Africanized hive, it is not just a hot hive. And I have only in one situation outside of Southern California, and granted, I haven't kept bees in Texas, Arizona, or New Mexico, but I have lots of friends that do. But I've only had one colony outside of Southern California that has ever been something I would consider Africanized. And this is something that happens. What happens is these Africanized colonies will come in and they will take over a colony, and that's how they basically, that's their modus operandi when it comes to taking over regions where European honeybees are. So it is absolutely a real thing. The likelihood, if you live outside of those regions, the likelihood is you are not dealing with an Africanized colony. They don't overwinter well. That's what has kind of kept them in the Southwest and in southern states. But the likelihood is you probably just have a hot queen. And it's also fall. So it could just be a hot, a very defensive hive, depending on the genetic line that you're working with. Some are more defensive than others. But the likelihood is you're not dealing with an Africanized colony if you're living outside of those regions. Now, if you live inside of those regions, it very well could be a situation where you had a colony come in and take over. And basically what it means is that you may not even know what occurred. That colony comes in, takes over that colony, kills that queen that you had originally, and you never saw any of that happen. So these are things that can happen even when you're not around, and you just don't realize that they've happened. But I'd be, unless you're in one of those areas, I'd be very suspect to say you actually have an Africanized colony. And let me just kind of put this in context. Like, the Africanized bees are a hybrid line of bees. They are not the bees from Africa. And I want to be real clear about that. The bees from Africa are just African bees. When we say Africanized, it's a term that we utilize here in the States, basically to describe colonies being taken over by this hybridized line of bees that was developed in Brazil. It was in the 1940s, 1950s, and the bees escaped. They were trying to basically bring the African bees and the European honeybees together to get some of the desirable qualities out of both. We had queens that escaped, and they've been marching their way north since then into the United States. And that's been going on for decades. And really, we started to see Africanized bees. I know in Southern California, we really started to see them. I want to say it was in like the early 90s is when we started to hear stories about Africanized bees. Now, these are the bees that, like, when you get a lawnmower anywhere near a colony, like, people die because thousands of them will attack them at one time. So this is a very different thing. When we say that we're dealing with an Africanized colony, these are very different temperaments than a hot hive. So I just want to be really clear about that. If you are covered from head to toe in bees trying to sting you, yeah, you're probably dealing with an Africanized hive. If you've got 20 or 30 bees that are trying to sting you, or a colony that starts boiling over and starts smacking you in the face and things like that, that's probably just a hot hive. And it's probably time to requeen that queen, or just realize that you're in the fall and the bees are probably pretty hot at that time. So very different experiences between European honeybees and true Africanized bees. I mean, like I said, they will chase you for miles. Oftentimes, you can't get away from them. They are persistent. They'll attack people in your area. And I mean, if you're able to even just get up to the colony, it's not an Africanized colony. If you're dealing with an Africanized colony in the fall, you get 100 feet away from them, 200 feet away from them, you're already going to be getting attacked, because that's how defensive they are. So just keep that in mind. Okay, next question. Just finished the overwintering lecture. My question is regarding moisture and airflow in the hive and has several parts. Okay, so for context, I'm in Colorado Springs, where we reach temperatures of -15, but don't stay there long. Okay, so you have winter. I do too. Great. So let's talk about what your questions are. Local beekeepers tell me 100 pounds of honey is ideal here for the winter. Yep, that's what we recommend in the course, 100 to 150 pounds for northern climates. Number one question is, will a quilt box or sugar in the spacer box stop the airflow of the hive? Number one, I wouldn't recommend a quilt box. So I would recommend a moisture board, which is what we recommend in the overwintering lecture that's in module 8. So get your mind off the quilt box. I do not recommend those at all. Will the quilt box or sugar in the spacer box stop airflow? No, if you follow the overwintering instructions that we give in the overwintering lecture here in module 8, you'll see that that does not stop airflow whatsoever. When you're putting in sugar on the mountain camp method, you're not sealing that entire box with sugar. You're just putting a piece of newspaper down and then sugar on top of it. So there's going to be spaces on the sides that allow airflow to move through. So that's not going to be a problem with stopping airflow. Could an empty hive body be used in place of a spacer to hold sugar or wood shavings, or is that too much room? Again, I would not recommend using a quilt box, so wood shavings is not something I would recommend. You could use it as a spacer. It's a lot of space, though. And so, I mean, I guess you could if you were really in a jam and didn't want to make a 1x3 spacer, which I give you all the instructions for in module 8. So this is maybe a little premature of a question here, because a lot of this is going to be answered in module 8's curriculum. Could an empty hive? Okay, so yes, you could use that, but it's probably too much room. Just make the 1x3 spacer that I show you how to make in the instructional video for overwintering equipment. If I have a top entrance that spans the entire width of the box, is that too much airflow? Absolutely, that's too much airflow. When we're talking about airflow in the top box, we're only talking about a 1/2 inch hole, one hole in the feeding spacer. And the reason is you want passive airflow, but you don't want to lose all of your heat. Keep in mind that heat rises, and the more heat you lose out of that top entrance, the more heat that those bees are going to have to replace, meaning they're going to consume more honey faster to replace all of that heat that's being lost. So no, an open, completely open is not recommended. And again, I would really encourage you to watch the overwintering lecture in module 8. Could a lid with insulation above it be positioned sloping forward so that the condensation runs to the front of the hive and then out? Again, watch module 8. This is totally answered in there. You are not, so all of these ideas about condensation condensing above your colony are addressed in that module. And essentially what I tell you is you need to insulate the top. And the reason you insulate the top is you're trying to augment the temperature. You want the top to be insulated so that it's the warmest surface inside the colony, and the sidewalls are the coldest. And that means that your warm, moist air will condense on the sidewalls and not above your cluster, which is what you're trying to get at here, was that, you want the condensation to run out. No, you don't want the condensation to be anywhere above your bees. So it doesn't matter if sloping forward's fine so that you'll see moisture running out. The reality is, as long as it's not condensing above the cluster, you're not going to be dealing with moisture kill. So that's something that we also cover in that lecture. Is a quilt box or moisture board required for success? Absolutely. You do not want any moisture above that cluster. Any moisture above that cluster, if it condenses above the cluster and rains back down on your cluster, a wet cluster is a dead cluster. Your bees cannot dry off in the winter. Once they get wet, that's it. They're done. They're frozen. And what you'll find is a beautiful cluster, all dead bees frozen in place, and tons of honey all around them. And I get this call all the time in the spring about, well, I had plenty of honey, my mites were under control. Well, what did you do for moisture? Nothing. Well, if it condenses above, your bees are done. So you absolutely need a moisture board above. You need insulation above. All of this is covered in the overwintering lecture. I've heard some say that holds moisture and cools the hive if you use a quilt box or a moisture board. That doesn't make any, when it comes. So again, I would recommend watching the module 8 overwintering lecture. We cover all of this in the lecture, including the ways that bees heat hives, what the thermodynamics of the hive look like. People are going to tell you all sorts of crazy stuff. The thing is if you do the things the way that we show you in the Heroes to Hives course, and you live in a northern climate, it will work. We've had less than 10%, usually less than 5% overwintering losses for the last decade here in Michigan. And this method works very well that we teach you in this course. Follow the method. The folks that are telling you that it's going to cool off the hive by having a moisture wicking device, they don't realize, they don't understand the thermodynamics of a colony. They don't understand where moisture is accumulating and why you mitigate moisture using things like insulation and moisture boards. The moisture board is an insurance policy. When you put in a piece of 2-inch foam on top of that colony with the moisture board under it and your feeding spacer underneath that, what happens is that basically the the insulation is going to augment the temperature in the top of the colony because you're going to stop losing a lot of your heat out of the top of the colony. So the top becomes the warmest part of the colony. Just like a pop can on a hot summer day, like hot, moist air is going to condense on the coldest surfaces that there are in the environment. So what you're doing by putting that top insulation on is you're creating a situation where the sidewalls are the coldest part of the colony. All of your moisture is going to condense on the sidewalls. The insurance policy on that moisture board is just in case any excess moisture gets up there, it's not going to drop down. But from my experience of using moisture boards almost 20 years, and you use this method, is that the only thing that gets wet on the moisture board is the outer rim of the moisture board because, again, condensation is going to the outside. So that's the only place where that moisture board often gets wet. The middle of the moisture board never gets wet using this method, unless you've got water coming in from somewhere else, like you've got a leak somewhere where it's letting water in where the moisture board is. And we use black tar paper to help mitigate some of that as well. So that's all covered in that lecture. All right. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, again, just make sure that you watch Module 8. I have an instructional video on how to make all of the winter equipment that you need for the method that we teach. I teach you exactly step by step in the overwintering lecture how to set up your colony for winter using our method. Thousands of students have taken this course. The ones that use this method and the ones that employ it correctly are the ones who have great winter survival, and we hear this year after year from the course. So this is a method that is tried and true. I use it in my own personal apiary. I teach you exactly what I do in my own apiary to have the success that we do here. So there's no guesswork. We try to take all that out for you. Okay, last one that I've got here is queenless hives. Wish I could call, not very articulate. If these worker bees are laying, how are they fertile? I thought they were maybe just cloning themselves, but if that were the case, they would be female. And how are they prolific egg producers? Okay, so this question is about a queenless hive. So essentially, the reason that queenless hive, so let's talk about a queenless hive. So queen's gone. Queen pheromone's gone. Brood pheromone starts to reduce because brood's not being laid. Those are two of the key factors that keep ovaries of worker bees in check, meaning when those two things are in very high amounts, brood pheromone and queen pheromone, when we see those things in very high amounts, that is keeping those ovaries of the workers basically suppressed. As soon as the queen is gone, the queen pheromone starts to dilute. And over the course of time, the brood pheromone will start to dilute as well because you have no new brood being laid, meaning that the brood pheromone is slowly starting to come off. Once you hit a certain point, it's usually a couple weeks after a queenless situation, you're going to have a situation where the brood pheromone and the queen pheromone have gone to such low levels, and the queen pheromone is gone at that point, where the worker ovaries actually activate, meaning that they can now lay eggs. Now, queens are mated, meaning they've mated with a drone. Workers have never mated. Now, workers can lay eggs, but they cannot lay fertilized eggs, meaning they only lay drones. That's all they can lay. And they will lay thousands of eggs. I mean, they can lay tons of eggs, but they're all drones. So what that is when you get into this situation, you can think of it this way. When we think about organisms and how we measure success in our world, it's through reproduction. So the fact that a species continues to survive, that is success in the biological world, is that the species continues to survive as a species. The individual doesn't matter whatsoever. So what you're seeing in these queenless situations, these laying worker situations, is you are seeing workers trying to get their genetic pool, trying to keep their species alive. And the only way they can do that is by producing drones. The hope is those drones go off, fly, and mate with another queen, and the genetic line continues. The species continues. But the reality is, from a beekeeper standpoint, is when you see a laying worker situation, that is a death sentence. And the only way you can correct that is by combining it with a queen-right colony. You can throw queens at this thing all day long, and they will just keep killing her once those ovaries are activated. The only way you can get this to work out is by combining it with a queen-right colony using the newspaper method. So that's what you're seeing. The thing about the whole idea of workers being able to lay and can they keep a colony going? No, they can't. What will essentially happen over time is the workers will continue to lay. You're going to end up with a box full of drones at some point, and then it's just going to die. And that's it. You know, when we think about the laying worker situation, we call it, there's another term we use for this in the industry. It's called a hopelessly queenless colony, meaning there's no hope for this colony other than being able to combine it and salvage the bees that you have in there. That's a dead colony. So that's what you're dealing with. They are prolific egg producers, but again, it's just because they're trying, it's their last ditch effort to try and keep their species alive, get their genetics out in the world. That's what they're trying to do, is just get that last, last little bit of survival out of them for the species. So that's what we're looking at there. Okay, so that's all the questions that we had. I appreciate all the questions. I hope you enjoyed this review lecture. Again, the last review lecture on Module 9 will just have some instruction on the last parts of the course, things like that. But this is all you need right here to complete your final exam at this point. Final exam is open from October 15th all the way through December 31st, and then it will be closed. So get those exams taken. Hope you enjoy taking that exam. It's not meant to be exceptionally hard, but it is meant to test the knowledge outcomes for this course to make sure that you have met the knowledge outcomes. And if you did the work, if you went through the modules that were required and you watched the instructional videos, or excuse me, the review videos, you should have no problem passing this exam. All right. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.